Well, our subject this morning has what would Jesus do? Now, you've heard that saying before. It's become famous in the world. Christadelphians didn't coin it, and it's a good thought to ask, good question. Now, I have a computer. I don't understand them, but they know more than I know. But I have a disc of the Christadelphian magazine, going back, I guess, since the very beginning. I don't know. But I just put in the words, we would see Jesus, and it pulled up an exhortation by Brother Len Richardson that he gave in England many, many, many years ago. I don't know if Len ever came over to your side of the water, but he visited us, and we loved Brother Len. He was a very wise brother. I was in England at the time he was failing, and I asked if I could see him, and they said, no, he's not able to have visitors. And then he heard that I wanted to see him, and he sent word, send Bob. So I did see him, and I saw him not long before he died, and I was very pleased to have spent that time with him. He wrote many books. He wrote a book called Balancing the Book, which was a good one, but he wrote one, Being a Christadelphian for 60 years. And when he started to write it, he called it Being a Christadelphian for 50 years, but before he got it finished, he changed it to 60. Now, I'm not going to write a book with that title, but if I did write one, as of July, I could say Being a Christadelphian for 69 years, because I was baptized in 1940. So that's a long time ago. Well, at any rate, I pulled up his exhortation, and I liked the way he thought. He thought a little bit, you have the saying, outside the box over here, thinking outside the box. Well, he was a little outside the box thinker, and I found him refreshing and useful. So I read his exhortation carefully. Now, if you steal one good idea, it's called plagiarism. If you steal lots of good ideas, it's called research. Now, I didn't copy his exhortation, but I did read it over, and then I've tried to glean from it points that I thought were worth sharing with you. I would rather give you a good idea that someone else had than a lousy one of my own. So I don't claim total authorship of these words, but I think that they are worth us considering, because he did write an exhortation on what we would see Jesus. And he starts off by asking a question. And he says, do we really know what Jesus was like? Do we have a clear, and what is more important, a true mental image of the character of Jesus Christ? So he said, those are good questions for us to ask ourselves, and I think you'll agree with that. So it's important that we know what Jesus was like if we're going to say, what would Jesus do? In other words, a lot of us say, well, just ask, what would Jesus do, and then do that, you'll be all right. Well, that's exactly true, if you know what Jesus would do. But you see, we all might have our own preconceived ideas of what Jesus would be. And so Brother Len Richardson said there's a danger that we might try to make Jesus more like ourselves, to see in him what we want to see, and create him in our image rather than we be in his image. And so that's a thought. The Jesus that we are trying to see, what's he like? Now, if you do what he would do, you will always do right, because he never sinned. He always did what was right. But we might, because of our own personality, have a little different opinion of what Jesus would do than someone else. You both say, well, I only did what Jesus would do, and yet you're doing opposite things. So it's not so simple as that. So what he tried to do in his exhortation, and we're going to try to do in this, is try to get a true picture of what he was like, so that when we do say, I would do what Jesus did, then we will really be following him, and not trying to create a false image of Jesus that we follow. So what would Jesus do if he were living today? I mean, this age is so different than the time when Jesus was alive. If Jesus was alive today, would he have a television set? And if he had one, what would he watch on it? Would Jesus have a computer? How would he use his computer if he had one? What books would Jesus read if he were here today? What would Jesus do for entertainment? We know from studying the life of Jesus that he did not have any entertainment, really. He was totally dedicated to doing his Father's will all the time. So it's interesting that if we ask these questions, which we just asked, to this audience, many of you come up with opposite answers to each other on the very same question: what would Jesus do? We tend to color our answers to suit our own taste. Telling us we know what Jesus would do is like us this is Brother Lynn Richardson's point, looking in a mirror that is distorted. And you know, if you go to fun houses, you can have all kinds of mirrors which make you fat and thin and make your face long. And so mirrors, unless they're nice and flat, can give you a wrong picture of the thing they're reflecting. And so he's saying that sometimes we might want to look in a mirror, and we look in a mirror that's distorted by our own personal likes and dislikes, our tastes, our bringing up, our education, where we live, whatever. So we're tempting in these classes, we would see Jesus to see the real Jesus and not the Jesus that we have created in our own imagination. And so Brother Richardson said there are two broad categories of opinions, maybe, that Christadelphians hold concerning Jesus Christ. He called one of them the old Christadelphian picture. He said he called it the theological Jesus. Jesus was the Son of God and not God the Son. Right on, we all agree. He went about giving lectures on the divine literal kingdom of God. He denounced the errors of his contemporaries. His miracles, which he did, were used to refute wrong doctrine, not to be a source of wonder in themselves. And that was one opinion. He said that's just a broad brush, lots of variations, but that's one opinion of how Jesus might have been. And then he said there's a second opinion of Jesus. He says, I'm going to call this the sentimental Jesus. This Jesus, he said, is more like the Jesus that the churches around us picture him, those that do not have the truth. Here was a man who never did anything unkind to anyone, who went about doing good, who was a perfect English gentleman. Now, maybe he was a perfect Australian gentleman, but appreciate this as being written by an English brother. He was kind and gentle and humble. No, that describes a lot of things that we believe Jesus was. But he says these are only generalizations, and there's degrees in them, and they're subject to, our own personal feelings. But he says now the first opinion of Jesus, the theological Jesus, was the most common way back in the early days of Christadelphians. And he says that the more sentimental type of Jesus is the one that's a little more popular today. And maybe your opinion is somewhere in between those, or it might be right on one of those. But if we want to know what Jesus really was like, we have to go to the Gospels, because they give us the true picture of the Lord Jesus Christ. He was the most balanced person who ever lived. Balance is so important in our life. There are Christadelphians, wonderful Christadelphians, who are unbalanced in some area. They're bent on one area which they think is more important than anything else. And no matter what you bring up, they come up with that. And Jesus was totally balanced. He was a gentleman, but his gentleness did not stop him from being angry at times. His love could also hurt. Jesus of Nazareth, we see in the Gospels, was no namby-pamby, was Lynn Richardson's description. He was not always nice to everyone. This is why the Pharisees and the scribes and the rulers, they hated him, and they crucified him. There are many stories in those records which we've read, which illustrate his total hatred for hypocrisy, his burning anger at men's thoughtlessness and selfish religious posturings. He was never angry with the treatment meted out to himself. That only made him sad. But he was very angry at the way he saw people treat each other, especially the poor and the neglected. Let's picture him in the synagogue, coming to Mark chapter 3, verses which we're familiar with. Chapter 3, verse 1. And Jesus entered into the synagogue. And there was a man there that had a withered hand. Now, Brother Lynn Richardson points out on the side that he believes that this man with a withered hand was a plant, that the scribes and the Pharisees got him and brought him into the temple, and they did this on the Sabbath day to just test Jesus to see what he would do. I mean, they were using a deformed man as a prop to try to trick Jesus, which was a cruel thing to do. And they watched him, whether or not he would heal him on the Sabbath day, that they might accuse him. So this man is just being used by them to test Jesus in their mind. And Jesus saith unto the man that hath the withered hand, stand forth, get up, come up here in the front. That's what Jesus said to this man. And the man obeyed, of course. And then he asked them questions. The best way to teach the truth is don't make statements, ask questions. Now, when I'm talking to people, sometimes I talk to some people, and I can see their eyes glaze over. And I know they're not listening to me at all. If you come up to me and say, hi, Bob, how are you? I'll say something stupid, which I'm good at doing. But I'll say, I'm dying. They say, that's great, you know. So we need to pay attention when we ask people. But when you ask a question, you do get their answer. Even I say, what's your name? He say Stephen. I said, he knew it before I knew it. But so often when people try to talk the truth to us, we begin to tell them everything instead of asking them things like, what do you think about the promises? What promises? Well, they don't know. Then when they ask you, then you're in a position to teach them. But when you just tell them, their eyes glaze over and it just goes in one ear and out the other. So Jesus starts off, they wanted to accuse him, and he says, I'll ask you a question. Is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath days or to do evil? To save life or to kill? Now, those are easy questions to answer, but they wouldn't even answer them. They held their peace. And Jesus looked around on them with anger. It's not a sin to get angry. It's a sin to sin when we're angry. And so we're told to be angry and sin not. Watch what you're thinking and saying when you get angry. You may say something you wish you had not said. So be in control of it. Jesus was always in control of all of his emotions. They never got the better of him. And he became angry, and he was grieved for the hardness of their hearts. It hurt him to see how cruel and uncaring they were. All they wanted to do was trick Jesus. They cared nothing about the man who had the withered hand. And so Jesus says, stretch out your hand. All of a sudden it was well. Now imagine that. All withered hand, had this for maybe all of his life, maybe it was a birth defect, and suddenly it's all well. Now, could any of them do that? No. Wouldn't that be wonderful to see? I'm so pleased to see that man who with a withered hand is now all well. I'm so pleased to see that man who was dead alive. I'm so pleased to see that leper being cleansed. I'm so glad to see that man who was born blind can see again. No. These things made them furious that you would do such a thing. And that's how hard their hearts were. And he was showing them up by pointing it out to them. And the Pharisees went forth and straightway took counsel with the Herodians against him, that they might destroy him. Anyone that would cure a man like that has to be killed. They weren't impressed by the marvelous miracle he did. They just wanted to get rid of him. Now, did you notice, we read that verse quickly, but it says that the Pharisees took counsel with the Herodians. Well, over our way, we have the Democrats and the Republicans, and they don't agree on anything. They fight like cats and dogs. They sit on each side of the aisle, and they are bitter enemies. But if we were attacked by the Japanese, as we once were, they all came together because of a common enemy. Over here you have the Labor and you have the Liberal Party. I don't know if they're as bitter towards each other as our parties are, but what's the point? The point is that these people who hated each other hated Jesus more than they hated each other, so they were going to work together to kill Jesus. Even though they hated each other, they would cooperate with each other because they had a common enemy who did a dastardly thing to heal a man on the Sabbath. And he was angry. And he had a right to be angry. But he didn't sin when he was angry. Be careful that when you're angry, you do not do something you'll be sorry for. So we see Jesus here. What would Jesus do? He was angry at the callousness, the hard-heartedness of those that he was wanting to convert, wanting to help get them into the kingdom. Picture Jesus when he goes into the temple. He makes a little whip of small cords. He didn't hit people with it. He turned over the tables, exploited, and he drove out those excited, bellowing beasts that had no right to be there. Is this the gentle Jesus, meek and mild, that sometimes we sing about? Jesus condemned the Pharisees in no uncertain terms. He said, because they would rather obey their own rules rather than those of God. They made void the word of God by saying Corban. You could get out of taking care of your own family by their own traditions. In vain ye worship me, teaching for doctrines the commandments of men. And it's still being done today. Think of the churches around us with beautiful big buildings, and in vain they worship God. Why? They're teaching for commandments, the traditions of men, and not what God said. Many, many years ago, I was flying on TWA. It's an airline that doesn't exist anymore. And I happened to be flying east for a study weekend, and it was Friday. And when I got on the plane Friday morning, and this was back when they treated you nicely when you flew, and they handed me a menu, and they said, because it's Friday, we have special dispensation from the Pope that you may eat meat if you're on a TWA flight. And I thought, well, wasn't that clever? Now, if it's a sin to eat meat on Friday, which we don't believe it is, then it's sin whether you're on an airplane or not. But you see how they take their traditions and their laws and they distort them, and they even make exceptions to them if you pay them enough money to get the exception made. So Jesus had no time for the traditions of men. Why do you transgress the commandment of God by your tradition, Jesus asked. Ye hypocrites. He didn't pull any punches. Well, did Isaiah prophesy you, saying, this people draweth nigh unto me with their mouth and honoreth me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. In vain they do worship me, teaching for doctrines the commandments of men. And that's why we have to go to our Bibles and find out what the Bible said, not what some man said. Some of the creeds of the world are totally the opposite of what Scripture has taught us. Now, when he said that, his disciples, his apostles, that little small group of 12, realized that he had, in their mind, overstepped. So his own followers came to him and said, do you know that the Pharisees were offended when they heard you say this? See, he did offend people if they were wrong. But Jesus was standing up for the Lord and not for man. He wanted the praise of God more than the praise of man. But unfortunately, people today would rather have the praise of man than the praise of God. So there are lots of stories about Jesus that reveal him a man of tremendous power, striding through the traditions and formalities and laying the axe to the root of the tree. Is this your Jesus? We might be too cozy. We might purr too easily. As a community, we could be in danger of being too complacent, and we don't like to hear from a critic. What would you feel if Jesus came to your home ecclesia and told you off? We know that he did, through John, speak to 7 ecclesias which are now all out of existence. He said some harsh things to them, and they're all gone. On one of our trips, we were privileged to visit each site of those 7 ecclesias. The best ruins are in Ephesus, and the worst ones are in Philadelphia. And Philadelphia was one of the cities that he praised, and Ephesus was one of the cities which had left their first love. So how would you feel if Jesus came to you and really called you a hypocrite and bawled you out for some of the things you've been doing? Is this our Jesus? Overturning tables was not one of the chief and certainly not one of the favorite occupations of Jesus. As he did it, Jesus always did what was right, even if it was not something he liked to do. He was gentle. Compassion was his middle name. Grace was poured into his lips, and the common people loved him and heard him gladly. He did not want to break the bruised reed, but to mend it and to use it. He would not crush out the smoking wick, but pour oil and help it get well. He was not of a contentious nature, though he sometimes had to contend. He was a man of peaceable, gentle inclinations. He was happier in the home in Bethany than disputing in the temple courts. But Jesus never shrank from duty because it was just unpleasant. He never courted popularity. He loved the praise of God more than the praise of man. Now, Paul tells us in Romans about God. He says, behold, therefore, the goodness and severity of God. On none which fell severity, but toward thee goodness, if you continue in his goodness. Otherwise thou shalt also be cut off. Now, because Jesus was the express image of his Father, I think that verse can honestly be applied to Jesus too. Behold the goodness and the severity of Jesus. See, he wants to come back as our friend. But he's going to say, depart from me, I never knew you, to some. Those will be terrible words to hear from the lips of the Master. But if we have not been like him, they may apply to us. And so, what would Jesus do? Do what you think Jesus would do, and you'll be right. But be sure that what you think Jesus would do is what he really would do. You see, we all have different personalities. We certainly know that's true. Some of us are more friendly and outgoing. Some of us are more introverted. None of this is right and wrong. Some of us would rather curl up with a good book at home than go be with a crowd of brothers and sisters. It can be done, but again, we need each other, so we ought not ignore each other. But some of us are more, in our ecclesia, we're always trying to get everyone to think about each other. And so we came up with a little idea. We have an ecclesial address list, and everybody's on it from A to Z. And so we said, look at find your name on the ecclesial address list. Next week, pick the name right below yours, whatever it might be, and send them a card. Send them a letter. Telephone them. Make contact with them. How are you? I was thinking about you. Just a short little note. Doesn't take very much time. And the next week, go down to the next name. And in our case, it will take us a whole year to go all the way down the list. There's enough, 52 weeks in the year. We have about 80-some members, but a lot of them are families. So you would send a card to a husband and wife. And I got read out by one sister. I'm not friendly like you are. And she was righteous indignation that I had the audacity to ask her to contact somebody else below her name. And she's not going to do it. And she didn't. And it wasn't right for me to try to make her. I was just trying to get us all thinking about each other. And I thought, well, if you have a little plan, and a lot of people got cards from people they never had heard from before. Imagine, Brother Smith sent me a card. He was just thinking of you. Hope you're well. Love. It doesn't take long. But you see, if you don't like that kind of thing, you're not going to do that kind of thing. And so, but that's not a sin for her to be like that. I don't know. She didn't sin, but she sure did tell me off. And I love her. Whenever you really insult me, and that happens, the first thing I do is put you on my prayer list. And I pray for everyone that hurts me until the sting goes away. And when you're hurt by somebody, you just think of them, and you can feel that. And you mustn't allow that to be there. You've got to open that up and get it out. And so if you are hurt, you pray for the one that hurts you. That's scripture. Jesus prayed for those who were crucifying him. Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. They were killing him. Stephen being stoned, lay not this sin to their charge. It's right to pray. Sometimes I've asked people to pray for someone that they were having trouble with. I could never pray for him. He's too wicked for me to pray for. Well, he's not crucifying you. He's not stoning you. There is nobody that you cannot pray for. And the more you don't like them, the more you need to pray for them. What would Jesus do? Well, we already know what he would do. He would pray for them. He did. And so any plan you can come up with, that you can express your love for God by the way you're treating others. I sent this lady a card every time her name came on my list. Sometimes I even sent her some extra ones. But to her, she was quite self-righteous in not doing that. So if I would ask her, what would Jesus do? She might have given a different answer than I would give. So some of us are friendly and some of us are less friendly. Sometimes it's just bashfulness. It's not a sin. Don't try to make somebody else be like you.
Ladies and gentlemen, can I have attention, please? Testing of the fire evacuation system will be carried out shortly. Please disregard any alarms or tones or alarm bells. This is a test only.
I'm paying no attention to you. But you did interrupt. So we're back to trying to see what Jesus would do so that we could be more like him. The heart is desperately wicked, deceitful above all things. Who can know it? And so we have to realize that that's not your heart I'm talking about. That's not my heart. All of us have this kind of heart because we're all mortal. And so we all are trying to crucify the flesh. And it hurts. It's fatal to complete it. But if we can crucify our natural inclinations, there was a song out our way years ago, doing what comes naturally. And it's wrong. If you're just doing it, and Frank Sinatra said, do it my way. And he was a wicked person. The way we want to do it is Jesus' way. We would see Jesus. We want to get to know what he was like. We want to try to do what he would do. So as we are studying, we would see Jesus. Let's try to think what he would do, not what we would like to do or what we think he would do if he was us. It's not as like he was us. It's like we have to be like him. And then you do that. And then you'll be all right. But if we have a preconceived idea of what we think he might have been, well, we may say, well, I did what Jesus would do, but no one else would agree with you. He would have done that, whatever it was you're doing. So we read this morning, Mark chapter 12. Have you ever realized the fact that the term, the widow's mite, is unscriptural? You hear people talk about the widow's mite. It's not in the Bible. People think, wait a minute. Well, we read it this morning, but what I'm saying is still true. The widow's mite is not in the Bible. Jesus, see, was so very conscious of little things that most of us don't even notice. He noticed this widow. He also saw the people throwing in lots of money because they were rich. And they threw in a lot. They say that they had like bells, metal bells. And you could throw your money in there and all the way down, you know. Wow. And everybody, whoopee, look how much money they put in. And here comes a widow. And she had 2 mites. The word widow's mite is unscriptural. It's 2 mites. And there came a certain poor widow, and she threw in 2 mites, which make a farthing. Now, I don't think anyone noticed this little widow except Jesus. See, he says the hairs of your head are numbered. The Lord knows more about you than you know about yourself. None of us know how much we have up there, and I don't have very much. But it's sure getting less. But it doesn't matter how much I got. The point is, the Lord knows how much. And so he knew all about this widow. And he called his disciples and said unto them, Verily I say unto you, this poor widow hath cast more in than all they which have cast into the treasury. For all they did cast into their abundance, but she of her want did cast in all that she had, even all her living. So Jesus knew the sacrifice she was making. He knows when you make a sacrifice, you are to give until it hurts, not just give of your abundance. And that's not just money. It's your time. It's your efforts. It's maybe writing a note to somebody else that needs encouragement. You'd be surprised if you tried that in your ecclesia. The happiness, those little short notes from you to someone that you never have written to before. I don't know what to say, she told me. This guy was bothering me. I just say, I'm thinking about you. I love you. You know, we do love each other, don't we? Why don't we say that? There was a man that his wife was divorcing him, and she said that he had not spoken to her for 20 years. And the judge says, is that right? And he said, yes, Your Honor. He said, why? I didn't want to interrupt her. But you can always say in the middle of anything, I love you. And one sister asked her husband, do you love me? He says, of course I told you that 20 years ago. It's something we need to say often. And you know what happens when you say, I love you? The person you're saying it to hears it, but you know who else hears it? You do. I believe that if you want to love God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind, that you ought to say to every day to God, God, I love you. If you'll try it, it works. You hear your own voice saying, I love you. And it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The more you tell someone you love them, the more you do love them. That's why you never ever want to say, I hate you. That's a terrible thing. We never let our children say anything like that. So this poor widow, did you ever think of the fact that she couldn't tithe? Now, tithing is 10%. She could give everything. She could split it with the Lord, or she could keep it, but she couldn't tithe. Now, all of you have enough money that you can tithe. You can give 10. And I think tithing is a good idea. I don't think it's mandatory. I think maybe it might be the minimum. But if Christadelphians really did all tithe, there's all kinds of things that we could do that we don't do because we lack the funds to do it. You saving it for a rainy day? Jesus is going to come, and the rain will be over. It'll be too late to hang on to it. Our people over our way, a lot of them are losing their savings. But you see, you can't lose the salvation unless you let it happen to you. So Jesus knows what you have and what you're giving of what you have. So what would Jesus do? Well, you know what he did. He gave everything. He gave his life. We've been talking about Barnabas. What a wonderful brother Barnabas was. And some of us believe that he was the rich young ruler who came to Jesus and said, "Good master, what can I do to have eternal life?" And Jesus said, "Sell everything you have and give it to the poor and come and follow me." And he went away sorrowful because he was very rich. So it didn't set well at the time, but later on that same man, if it was Barnabas, did exactly what Jesus told him to do. He sold his lands and he gave the money to the truth. And he's going to be in the kingdom. But you see, while he had all that money, he went away sorrowful, which tells you that money does not bring happiness. It helps you to be miserable and comfort, but it does not bring happiness. And there's a lot of rich, miserable people. There's a boat sitting out here, beautiful boat. It just sailed in here, and it came from New Zealand. I was talking to the manager of the hotel this morning. And he was admiring the boat, and he said to the owner, "That's a beautiful ship." He said, "Could I go on and look out?" And he said, "No. That's my boat. I'm not going to let you see in there." See how, of course, we don't expect any of those people to be Christ-like, but how wrong we can act with our possessions with each other. So what would Jesus do is a really good question. But we have to be sure that we know what he would do and not have him do what we think we would do or he would do if he were us. Now, it's not going to be easy, brothers and sisters, to do what Jesus did because he went against everything that's normal for flesh. When you were reviled, he reviled not again. When they were saying bad things about him, Pilate marveled. He looked and we went, "Look at what all they're saying about you." I mean, how did they say, "That's not true. I can prove that wrong." He said, not to render to Caesar. "No, you didn't hear me. I said, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar." And God, see, they lied about him. And he let it go. You don't have to defend yourself. Certainly we don't feel defending ourselves with our fists, but you don't even have to defend yourself against people that are lying about you. If you know it's a lie, certainly God knows it's a lie. Don't get too upset. Let it be. Even Solomon said, in the Proverbs about talking bad about somebody. So be careful because you've also done it yourself. People do say unkind things about each other. What would Jesus do? He wouldn't do that. We do love each other. We do love God. We do love Jesus. And what would Jesus do? He would do what was loving. Would that mean that he never corrected people? Oh, no, he did. But if you really love somebody and they're correcting you and you have real love for them and they have real love for you, you hope they'll be gentle. But if they're not gentle, that's not your problem. That's theirs. And if they do hurt you, put them on your prayer list and pray for them until you no longer feel hurt. The hurt will go away, but it won't go away right away. You have to work at it. But you know deep down in your heart how you feel towards each other. And if you should have an enemy in the truth, or out of, I used to think one time, I don't think I have any enemies. And then I got one. And to put it mildly, he hated my guts. And I went up to speak to him, and I put my hand out, and he said, I don't want to touch you. Well, I didn't really want to touch him either, you know. So we could be at a hall like this and mingle around all day long. We just never seemed to bump into each other. Because he wouldn't speak to me, and so I wasn't speaking to him, and I realized how wrong I was. I was reacting and not acting. And that's not what the Lord would do. So I put him on my prayer list. Now, I could make him in my prayers do what he would never do personally. I could visualize him in my mind. I talked yesterday about where there's no vision, the people perish. And so I could picture this man talking to me and smiling. He wouldn't normally, but in my prayer, he couldn't help it. He's my dream, my vision, he's smiling. And I would be telling him I loved him. And I kept asking God to help me love him, because you don't naturally love somebody that you know hates you. So you got to work at it. But it's not an option, it's a command. So, and I did that for weeks, no. Months, yes. Maybe a year, a very long time, until that sting was gone. When I would think of his name, I didn't feel that anymore. So I knew I had to do something, but he still would. So I went to the back of the hall one day, and before the meeting started, I carefully walked. Well, I don't have a mic on. Never mind. Well, I'll do it anyway. So I'm in the back of the hall. He's sitting up here. He doesn't know I'm coming. I'm saying I gotta leave. But he won't talk to me. So I creep up to him, and he's looking straight forward. He doesn't see me coming. I love you. It's shocking. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, gentlemen. It worked. It's amazing. Now, not always does it work. Those that Jesus prayed for still crucified him. Those who Stephen prayed for still stoned him. But, of course, we know Stephen's prayer was answered because Paul was one of those that was in on it, and he's going to be in the kingdom together there. But after I said that, he would speak to me. In fact, there was a dear sister who fell asleep, and she lived about 80 miles from where we lived, on a farm, and they asked me to do her funeral. And I'm driving up to do her funeral, and I haven't allowed enough time, and I get to the funeral parlor, and there's a lot of people there, and I have to go to the men's room, and they don't have a men's room. It's just, whoever's in there, like an airplane. And there was a big long line, and he was first in line. And I should be on the platform. And he said, Bob, do you need to go here? I said, I do. He's taking my place. Now here's a brother that wouldn't have done that for me before. But you see, because I prayed so fervently for him, and I forgave him, he forgave me. And he fell asleep as my beloved brother in the Lord. We were no longer enemies. That won't always happen, but I tell you, it won't happen until you do something. You can't make them do anything, but you can make yourself do what's right. And so what would Jesus do is our subject. Incidentally, that story was not in Lynn Richardson's talk at all. That's a little personal thing there. But the point we're trying to make all this week is that we would see Jesus means we've got to be like Jesus, and then of course do what Jesus would do. But be sure you have the right picture of him, because sometimes we create in our own mind a picture of him, and then we are like that, and it's not the way he would have done it. And when he comes, he will say, I don't even know who you are, if we didn't really get the right picture of him. But if you, brothers and sisters, get the right picture of Jesus, and then you do what Jesus would do, you'll always do the right thing.